Thank you all so much for coming. I need to turn on my clicker. I always do this. Okay. I'm Sophie. I'm from Bonn in Germany. My pronouns are she and her. You can find me on social media. I will share the links later again. I'm most of the time a tester, but I do a lot of different stuff too. So it's kind of hard to define my role. So let's go with tester ++ or something. I should mention that I work for a company called Con, otherwise my boss will be sad, which I don't want him to be. We have offices in Bonn, in Hamburg, both in Germany, and in Białystok in Poland. And I also have hobbies, but that's enough about me. I have been asked to ask you to rate the session, so here's the link. It's the same for all sessions, so anyway. But one thing that's very important to me is that I would like to start with a super quick content note. I'm going, as you may have guessed from the abstract, to talk about mental health and mental illness, including but not limited to depression, anxiety, and eating disorder. Also, I will mention self-harm and intrusive suicidal ideation. There will be mention of verbal harassment, physical illness, in particular cancer. Still, the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm so ready to get rid of that disclaimer. But I'm also going to talk about war, which obviously I don't want to either. But that's enough. Oh, if any of these topics is too much for you today, I won't be offended if you leave, and that's still true during the talk. Don't be scared to disrupt or anything. If it's too much, look after yourself. I won't be offended. But I'm going to start now. And I'd like to talk about how I got here first. So, I'm a hypocrite. This time of year, last year, at this exact same conference, I talked about imposter syndrome. And I urged you all to make friends with your inner critic, to tame your inner monsters, to not hide behind a wall of perfectionism, and to chill, basically. At the same time, I was already spiraling. One of my earliest tells of going into crisis is that I desperately try to be better, like a new and improved version of myself. I try to take on more work while also reading more, but only the smart books, no trash, only smart things. I try to bike to work in every weather, have a super sophisticated 7 gazillion step skincare routine. And most importantly, I eat as little as possible, and I exercise like a mad person so I can finally achieve my life goal of having -7% body fat. So, excellent job on taming monsters. I feel like control of my life is slipping from my fingers, so instead I control my body, and I try to thrive on self-deprivation. Tried that? Didn't work. Gonna try again, probably at some point, because... Anyway, at the beginning of October last year, I gave this talk, or rather a talk with this title and abstract, as a conference in Berlin. And I did my whole thing of be kind to yourself, be mindful of symptoms, talk to others about your problems, get help if you need it. And I did absolutely nothing of that. At the end of October last year, I had the mother of all breakdowns, accidentally ran a half marathon just to make my effing brain shut up for once, sobbed until the sobbing made me throw up, and then finally allowed my family to take me to the emergency room of a mental hospital. I half expected them to give me a handful of chill pills and send me home after a stern lecture about sleeping and eating better. And instead, the doc told me he'd rather keep me there, and all told, I stayed for 11.5 weeks. Turns out I wasn't normal amounts of sad. I was, this shit has an ICD-10 code, and you'd better not handle knives for a while, amounts of sad. That's no joke, I wasn't allowed knives in the hospital. If you did the math, you may have noticed that the end of the CFP for Agile on the Beach fell right into the time of my loony bin sojourn. I really, really, really wanted to submit, and I wanted to come back here, but I had neither the spoons nor the access to my computer to do so. But then Steve texted me, Steve Smith, and he encouraged me. And I told him, yeah, I would love to, but I can't at the moment. So he said, just submit anything you have. And as you can see, because I'm standing here, this one was selected. I got the acceptance mail while still in hospital doing therapeutic pottery, of all things. So yeah, that felt a bit ironic. Or maybe hypocritical. Or both. I needed a bit of really good, really hard thinking. Am I kidding myself? Am I deceiving others? Do I still believe the message of this talk? And do I even still want to give it, considering that one of the reasons for my meltdown was that people, one I had trusted, one I had never seen before in my life, had used what I share publicly about my health to mess with my head. As you can see, the answers are, respectively, no, I don't think I'm kidding myself. No, I really don't think I'm deceiving others, at least not knowingly or willingly. Yes, I still believe the message of this talk, and yes, and those two people can go to hell. So today you get, you don't talk about that at work. Part 2. Return of the Brain Weasels. And that's a very long title to fit into a tiny box. So, as in the first version, let's begin with a bit of backstory. I had my first diagnosed depressive episode at, I think it was 21 or 22, paired with eating disorder and a generous helping of anxiety. But I had symptoms way earlier than that. I remember obsessing about my weight as early as primary school. But at uni, it got really, really bad. So my studies suffered along with me, which resulted in a way too long time for my diploma and a crap CV. That in turn caused me trouble to find a job, because how do you write in a cover letter, yeah, I couldn't really focus on math because my inner demons were eating my brains for snacks, but don't you worry, yes, I can hit the ground running, and I absolutely have what it takes to thrive in a fast-paced environment. Not easy, huh? When I finally landed a job, it was with a bit of gambling. When my not quite then, but now boss kept asking what went wrong at university, I told him about the eating disorder, but nothing else, because I thought that he might understand how that would take time to recover from, but he wouldn't think it would affect my work life now. And I got the job on a limited contract at first, so I kept my mouth firmly shut about the brain weasels. I thought you just don't talk about that at work, especially not on a limited contract. Not a good idea. Until one day I didn't not talk anymore. I had been at a conference and I was super surprised. I was astonished to see that people there talked about mental health in public, in a professional environment and everything. But it made sense to me. We are agile. We're supposed to value respect and courage and openness, so we should be able to be courageously open and still be respected, right? So after the conference, back home at the office, back home and back at the office, I told my boss and everybody who would listen the whole entire story of my messed up brain. And I still got the permanent position. So At one point, I decided to do this conference talk, and I've been hopping conferences with it for a while now. So everybody with basic Googling skills can find out big chunks of my medical history, which can lead to problems, but more on that later. In the earlier versions of this talk, I shared 10 lessons I had learned from being entirely open about this topic. So today, I would like to revisit these 10 lessons. Lesson 7 will surprise you. No, it's not like that, I promise. It's no clickbaiting here. Let's revisit these lessons then and see what has changed and what has stayed the same after my latest flirt with the big crazy. Okay, nothing at all has changed with lesson 1. No, you're not the only one, and no, you can't be. Just look at the statistics and then look around you. And I know that you have noped out of the EU, but I think the numbers will look pretty similar to this. So if you look at the statistics and you look at this room, how plausible is it that the mathematically speaking 7.3 mentally absolutely stable people that must exist somewhere in Europe are all in this room and all at your office and wherever you go? Doesn't make sense, right? Everywhere you go, there must be someone else whose life has been affected by psychological ill health, in themselves or in people near and dear to them. That you learn super fast when you start speaking openly about the topic. There's always, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But most people feel entirely alone until they find their siblings in arms. So we might as well start speaking. Second lesson, openness inspires openness. And yep, still true. Once I had started speaking openly about this topic with my colleagues, they shared their secrets with me. One even shared something that he said he had never shared with anybody at work, and he was really nervous to do so, but he said, because I was so open, he felt safe to confide his story in me, and his trust meant and still means the world to me. He later told the rest of the bunch this story, and you can tell it's a weight off his shoulders. Secrets are like that. They're little tokens of intimacy. You always worry that you burden people with your secrets, but in truth, by sharing them, you also give a gift. You signalize safety and understanding, so the other person can share their secrets with you if they want to. And by sharing the burden of a secret and carrying half of both secrets each, the sum feels a bit lighter for both of you. Take that, physics. Now here it becomes a bit more complicated. Openness is a habit, not a character trait. The point I originally tried to make here was that I used to be super shy and anxious, so voicing my opinions in work discussions was super hard for me, especially when I needed to contradict people. And I thought that was just the way I was as a person. Born like that, always will be, nothing to change about that. But once I had shared something so personal, like my medical history, voicing my opinions about backlog item 8273 wasn't so daunting anymore. And the more I exercised openness, the easier it became. Exercise makes things easier. Neat trick, huh? So much for the original point. But it got to a point where I became a total oversharer. I had no filter. A thought would form in my head and come tumbling out of my mouth. And one kind person once told me that no, it wasn't that I was entirely filterless. He couldn't imagine me voicing an unkind thought. And that's true, I try to do that. When I catch myself thinking unkind things, I try to course correct before my lips start moving. But I did get a bit reckless. I had to learn the hard way that sometimes you have to translate your thoughts into corporate speak. It's actually not, stop effing patronizing me, I know what I'm doing. You absolute... It's corporate speak for that thought is, thank you so much for your input, and it is duly noted. You will find, however, that I do have the necessary expertise to make informed decisions on the subject. That's what you say. I learned that now. So the lesson stays true, but it comes with a caveat. Oops, wrong direction. Openness is a habit, not a character trait. But don't let it turn into a bad habit, into an addiction. That's not a good idea. Lesson 4, showing vulnerability shows strength, comes with a big ouchie. I've mentioned in the beginning that my public openness about vulnerable topics has been used against me. The entire story is long and complicated, and I don't think I can tell it yet without losing my cool. Just know that it involves lying, manipulating, and gaslighting. Not a fun experience. But let's get back to the original lesson first. It went along the lines of the following. I have always been a sensitive person, plus I have depression and anxiety, and I take things way too personally. All grievances, always. And when I was a kid, I was mercilessly bullied for it. And when I cried about the bullying, I was bullied for crying about the bullying. So as a consequence, I had a horrible conflict aversion. And I didn't want to face any conflicts. And sometimes that meant that I let people walk all over me. But guess what? Sometimes you have to face the conflict to resolve the conflict. Even if that means you have to admit that you are hurt. I have been called brave or strong a few times over the last few years because I've been through shit times and I talk about them. And it feels nice. And it's true, I have braved storms. I've been through depression, cancer, horrible people, gaslighting, trauma. I've braved these storms, but that doesn't make me invincible. Showing my vulnerabilities and having them exploited was painful, horribly so. And it got me close to giving up and only blaming myself for my silliness of thinking, I can help someone by speaking. And I only had myself to blame. I came close to that, but not entirely there. It's on them for being horrible people and treating me horribly, not on me. They can go to hell. Again. So I will continue to accept and be open about my vulnerability. And I choose to still be open towards people and assume and trust in the fact that people aren't generally horrible. But I've learned a bonus lesson. Some people are just horrible. Beware of them. And oh boy, does this one stay true. Wow. Some people don't get it. They have never experienced depression or anxiety, and they have no idea what it feels like. So they will tell you to suck it up, buttercup, or they will tell you it's all in your head, which I have to admit is technically true, because my head is where my brain is, and my brain is where all the neurons fire all the unhealthy thoughts, like shitty confetti cannons. But that's not what they mean when they say it's all in your head, so not true at all. You know, I was released from the hospital after 11 and a half weeks of intense work on myself, of going through my heart and my mind and my soul with a fine comb, of trying to unlearn patterns that I had learned in a lifetime of being me. I had lost like 5 kilograms because the food was so utterly disgusting. And I was exhausted because it was intense. I was So tired of everything. But there were people who seemed to think and under the radar voiced the idea that after almost 3 months off work, I must now feel well rested and energized. Like I had been on a Caribbean cruise instead of in a hospital for the perpetually overwhelmed. I've now been in a hospital for treatment of cancer and for treatment of a severe depressive episode. So I consider myself kind of an expert on the fact that the sentence, "be grateful it isn't cancer," doesn't make sense. It's rubbish. Both illnesses suck. Both treatments are draining. And both illnesses are potentially fatal. Don't make light of that. Some people still won't get that, so they give super unhelpful advice. I've been told to look on the bright side, to count my blessings, to just stay positive, more times than I can count. And I'm going to go ahead here and assume that people who say that also go to people with asthma and say, "Have you tried breathing? I hear it's really good for getting enough air." Because that's what those things sound like to me. It's not how it works. You can't just stop being sick and be awesome instead. But I also know that there really are people out there who genuinely don't understand, but are willing to understand. They have no idea what it feels like. Lucky them. And so, to keep open communication going, I will assume blissful oblivion instead of a pig-headed refusal to believe, and still explain. So, if you're wondering, genuinely wondering what depression feels like, I have to admit I can't really tell you because it's different for everybody. There's a list of official symptoms like a low mood, loss of interest, hopelessness, social withdrawal. And if you tick a certain number of boxes for a certain period of time, congrats, you're officially depressed. But there's more feelings and different feelings. And the lines between depression and anxiety and borderline disorder and everything, they blur. And sometimes it's just not feeling anything at all for quite some time, which is quite scary. And it makes even the concept of feelings sound weird to you. It's a whole cloudy mess of your brain going, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no," all the time. Like a constant voice in your head telling you, "Nope, nope, 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 I don't want this." And you can't even define what this is. And it's a creeping poison. It rots everything. Fun activities become exhausting. Chores become insurmountable tasks. Friends become scary. They become scary. A sense of irony becomes cynicism. And even my ability to laugh about myself turns into bitter self-deprecation. So no, not just sad. And even worse than the plain and simple not understanding is the understanding and then exploiting. I've mentioned the gaslighters enough now, but the exploitation of my vulnerabilities has happened before. Like I said, I have a tendency to overshare and to gush. And when a topic is important to me, I get all wide-eyed and animated. And apparently that makes me look like an easy target. Because more than once, men have chosen these moments to try to cross lines. One dude I talked to once about this talk, actually, about being open and living an authentic life, even with the dark sides of your life and your soul. And at one point, this dude said, "You know, Sophie, I really like your openness. And I'd like to be very open now too and tell you about all my kinks and that I've been thinking about doing them to you the entire time you were talking." Gross, dude. Not as kinks in themselves. You do you, bro. but the way he just shoved them at me. Like he was a verbal exhibitionist jumping out of a bush and opening his raincoat and going, "Look at me, babe." Absolutely creepy. And it made me really uncomfortable. So sadly, still true, some people will try to exploit perceived weaknesses. Beware of horrible people. But enough about the horrible people, right? Let's go back to the nice people. If you feel overwhelmed by the darkness, look for the glimmers of light. They may not make the entire darkness go away, but they do give hope. So this lesson will forever stay my favorite. Most people, most humans are intrinsically kind, and they will want to help you if only you let them. I've seen that in action now so many times. One example that I like to share is how my back then still new colleagues, I had known them for like half a year or something, and they coached me through an entire flight when I admitted to one of them how scared I was. They were so sweet. They didn't know me, and I assumed they would make fun of me, but they cheered for me to make it through the flight. It was so sweet. Another example that I like to share is the story of this bracelet. It says, "Take your time." And I always wear it to conferences because at my very first in-person 3D conference, I had a blackout and I totally froze. And one person, a kind stranger, I didn't know her, she piped up in the audience in the silence and she said, "Take your time." It was so kind and so helpful. I'm not kidding. It helped me in that situation so much. I got back to the talk. It was amazing. You can see the willingness of people to help in the big things, like when there's a flooding and everybody rushes there to help. And you can see it in the small things, like when you drop a small coin and 3 people reach down to get it for you. Humans are pack animals. So they really want to help each other. And even if we didn't automatically feel helpful out of the kindness of our hearts, there's another factor. Helping others helps ourselves because it gives you a boost of these warm and fuzzy feelings. It makes you happy, and it can even lower depression. It's a scientifically proven fact. Lesson 8 is there's strength in numbers. You know, I know, sorry, 1 second. I know a lot about my illness. I know many of my triggers, my tells, my symptoms, and my coping mechanisms. The good ones, the healthy ones, and the bad ones. I know that it's good for me to sleep enough, drink plenty of water, get lots of fresh air, few caffeinated beverages, so far basically treat myself like a houseplant, to exercise but not too much, to eat healthy, and to socialize. I've learned to keep away from toxic people and from fashion magazines. I have learned that I hate body scans with a vengeance, but that there are mindfulness exercises out there that do help me, that don't feel like mumbo jumbo to me. I can recognize the early signs of a panic attack, and I know that if I act soon enough, moving about and box breathing will help me. And if the panic attack hits after all, I know, theoretically, that the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise helps me. By the way, I will share a list to things that help me, and it will include all the breathing exercises that I mentioned. So if you're wondering what the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise is, I will share later. The thing is, with all these things I know about my illness, that in the heat of the battle, I forget. And that's pretty normal because it's a panic attack, not a panic-friendly request, if it's not too much of an inconvenience. Thank you very much. And that's where other people come in. When my breathing gets shallow and weird on a plane, they can remind me to do the pursed lips breathing technique. But in order to do that, they need to know to do that. And conversely, when my colleague says, yeah, I really hate flying too, I can say, have you tried noise-cancelling headphones and fidget toys? They really help me. They are a game changer. When you start speaking with each other, you can start helping each other. It's so logical, and I still used to not see that. It's true, everybody is fighting their own battles, but that doesn't mean you cannot help each other. There really is strength in numbers. That also remains true. And super quick show of hands here, who gets the Lord of the Rings reference? 2 people. That must be a new record. Cool. Now, lesson 9 is bluntness uncomplicates things. Here, my original point was as follows. When I first thought about writing this talk, I was in a pretty stable phase. It had been years without therapy, without meds, and I was doing fine. It was like, healing is possible, and you can grow out of that, and I'm doing fine, and look, mommy, no handlebars. Look at me, I'm doing so great. But between the thinking about doing this talk and the writing this talk, 2 things shook me to the core. The first thing was this tiny little pandemic thing that we all went through. Remember the early days of the pandemic? You probably don't want to remember them. I don't. Remember the staying at home all the time, social distancing, giving up your hobbies, no hugging, and no handshake, no skin hunger is a thing, right? Humans need to touch humans. And then there was also the pandemic/depression chic of always wearing sweatpants. Ugh. It was a horrible déjà vu of my first bad episode, and it almost Pavloved me into spiraling. Maybe I would have gotten through with some bread baking and sea shanties and positive thinking alone. Remember that we were all of us into sea shanties for a while? You too. Yeah, maybe that would have helped me enough to get through it. But because the universe was trying to be funny, I was right in the beginning of the pandemic in April 2020 diagnosed with breast cancer. Going to the hospital for surgery that would change my life and my body forever, and then not being allowed visitors there, was quite the double whammy. Hands up if you think there's enough sourdough in the world to fix that without the need for a bit of therapy. You have no trust in sourdough. But there isn't. Let's be real here, there isn't. So yeah, I went to a psychologist, had a bunch of sessions, but then I rage quit because we didn't get along, and I was too butthurt to find a new one. So, one thought before that, back to the original point of this lesson. When I still went to therapy, I was really, really glad that I didn't have to lie about where I was going every Wednesday after the stand-up. I would have considered that, because I would have been scared that people would think I'm crazy. But that ship had sailed long before, sorry. So yeah, I didn't have to consider that, but then I rage quit therapy and I didn't look for a new shrink. And then the problems came. I messed up. Yeah, sure, I'm doing fine. Nah, I'm not trying to run away from feeling my feelings. It's exercise. Thank you very much. Being healthy here. It got worse and worse until I scared myself with regressing to self-harm, to recklessness, and super scary, intrusive thoughts when I crossed bridges. And all the time, I put on a happy face, a brave face. The thing that got me out of that was my mum. She said, "Honey, I'm going to be blunt here. Do you think it's possible that you're having another episode?" And I was admitted to the hospital the day after. So that's another thing that remains true. Don't tiptoe around the hard topics. Be blunt. Rip off the Band-Aid. We're at the last lesson. Don't forget the oxygen mask rule. There's life lessons that I wish I could tattoo on my brain forever, but not literally, because that would be disgusting. So a few of these life lessons are: 1, life is short, eat the cake. 2, not my circus, not my monkeys. And this one, maybe most importantly this one: please secure your own oxygen mask before assisting others. I've read some interesting critique about this rule. I think it was a Twitter thread back when Twitter wasn't a hellscape, by Jem Hill. It was about this one and its sibling, "You can't pour from an open cup." And Jem wrote that they really dislike this rule because it could be read as you have to deserve self-care and self-love, which is untrue. You're worthy of those things even when you don't take care of others after you do. You don't have to retroactively earn your oxygen mask by helping others after. Which is absolutely true. I 100% agree on that point. But what I meant when I chose to include this lesson in this talk as a life lesson learned from the speaking is that no, it's not selfish and not self-indulgent to take care of your mental health, to take time and energy to preserve it. I actually used to think that it was self-indulgent. I used to think that treating others nicer than I was treating myself was okay, maybe even a sign of my selflessness. I'm forever trying to unlearn this idea. Because if you don't fasten your own oxygen mask before you help everybody else to put theirs on, you don't earn brownie points with the universe, you pass out. So take time to take care of your heart and soul, just like you take time to take care of your teeth and brush them every day. You deserve it, and it's part of your job as a fully functioning adult. I ignored that job for too long when I tried to be better without trying to feel better. The result was a nice long stay in hospital and a whole lot of mushy food. Like, do they begrudge people teeth in the hospital? What's wrong there? It's so disgusting. But again, I stand by what I said. Be kind. But also be kind to yourself. Okay, so apparently, all my lessons remain true, with a tiny little bit of tweaking and adding here and there. So maybe I'm not a hypocrite after all. I will take my own advice here and be kind to myself. Let's practice this. No, Sophie, you're not being hypocritical. You're not betraying your own words. You lost your footing for a while. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. A little bump in the road doesn't mean you have to go back to the beginning and start over. And regressing and reverting to things you thought you had outgrown doesn't mean you shrink back to a smaller size. It just means you have to be reminded of your growth sometimes. It's okay. You're okay. Now, why am I telling you all this? Why still? Because mental health matters. Always has, always will. We're living in times of crisis, pandemics, wars, economical and ecological crises. The world literally on fire, and rich people, a bunch of power-hungry rich people pouring gasoline on the flames. it would be easy to despair, to give up, to sink into depression. And I mean that both in the colloquial sense and in the literal sense, the clinical sense. The prevalence of mental illness is high, super high, maybe even on the rise. The science is a bit unclear on that because taboo, you don't talk about it, you go undiagnosed. So yeah, the numbers are high and we still don't really talk about it. And when we do, we often do it badly. There's still so much taboo and stigma and stereotypes about the topic. We still way too often say, what a psycho, when we actually mean, what a horrible person, what an unkind person. It makes you lonely. It makes people suffer in silence, either because they don't even know what's happening to them, or because they are ashamed or afraid of what people will say. I firmly believe that everybody who speaks about mental illness in a calm and open way helps. Because if everybody knew what depression is, maybe they wouldn't say, "You can't be depressed, I saw you laughing yesterday." Instead, they would maybe say, "Hey honey, I see you're hurting. Want to find out how to get help together?" And maybe they wouldn't say, "Pull yourself together, it's only a flight, it's nothing." They'd say, "I think you're having a panic attack. Want to breathe through it together? I'll show you how. Do this." Imagine how much less alone that would make people feel. I know I've been lucky, very lucky. When I opened up about the topic with my family and friends, at work, and publicly at conferences, I've been met with so much kindness and understanding and support. And sure, there are unkind people, even horrible ones. But the vast majority of humans is human. If there was a fairy godmother of depression and she granted me a wish, I'd ask for everybody else in the world to be safe and cared for and accepted enough to talk about it if they want to. If they want to. Nobody has to talk about anything they don't want to talk about. But if they want to, they should be able to talk about it. But it wasn't a fairy godmother watching over me. It was the humans who held my hands. And I like to pay it forward. I'd love to be part of the network of human fairy godmothers who hold people's hands and say, "Welcome to depression, I'll be your guide. You're not alone. You can do this. I believe in you. I'll help guide you through." And maybe you'd like to join me, join us. And we join by speaking, by having an open-minded discussion about mental health and mental illness, an open mind and an open heart. So let's normalize speaking about it. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I don't actually know if we have time for questions. I'm not certain. No? Okay. Okay, you can find me somewhere. I'll happily ask any question you may have. I'd like to share this, though, before I let you go. This one is the speaker feedback QR code. That one is a list of things that helped me. And the last one is how to get in touch if you like to get in touch virtually. So thank you again so much. See you later. Thank you.